The gunshot echoed through the canyon just as Willa Carson's horse reared up in panic, throwing her sideways into the rocks before bolting down the mountain trail without her. She hit the ground hard, her shoulders screaming in protest as loose stones scattered beneath her, and by the time she managed to push herself upright, both her horse and her traveling companions had vanished into the swirling snow that had begun falling an hour earlier. The wind howled through the narrow pass, carrying with it the bitter cold of the Colorado Rockies in January 1878, and Willa realized with growing dread that she was utterly alone on a mountain that showed no mercy to the unprepared. She had left Tascosa, Texas 3 weeks ago with a small wagon train heading north to Denver, seeking a fresh start after her father's ranch had been sold to pay his debts following his death. The journey had been difficult from the beginning, with tensions running high among the travelers and supplies running lower than expected. When they reached the mountain passes, the group's leader had insisted they push through despite the threatening weather, convinced they could beat the storm that had been building on the horizon. That decision now seemed catastrophically foolish as Willa struggled to her feet, her leg throbbing where it had struck a boulder during her fall. The gunshot that had spooked her horse had come from somewhere down the trail, followed by shouting she could not make out over the wind. Willa's first instinct was to call out, to try to reconnect with the wagon train, but something in her gut told her to wait. The shot had not sounded like a hunting rifle or a signal. It had sounded like trouble, and in her current state, injured and alone, she could not afford to walk into danger blind. Instead, she began to climb. The slope above her rose steeply, covered in pine trees that bent under the weight of accumulating snow, but it would provide cover and perhaps a vantage point to see what was happening below. Every step sent pain shooting through her leg, and her fingers were already growing numb despite her gloves. The simple wool coat she wore had been adequate for the Texas panhandle winter, but here in the high country, it was pitifully insufficient. By the time she reached a small outcropping of rocks about 50 feet above the trail, the snow was falling so heavily she could barely see 20 feet in any direction. She huddled against the largest boulder, trying to use it as a windbreak while she caught her breath. Her whole body was shaking now, whether from cold or shock or both, she could not tell. She knew she needed to make a fire to find shelter, but the wind was too strong and she had lost her pack when the horse bolted. Everything she owned, every supply she had carefully rationed, was gone. The sound of horses moving on the trail below made her press herself tighter against the rock. Through the curtain of snow, she could make out 4 riders leading several horses without riders. Her heart sank as she recognized 2 of those horses as belonging to the Hendersons, the young couple who had been traveling to Denver to start a dry goods store. The riders were not members of her wagon train. Even through the snow, she could see they wore heavy coats and wide-brimmed hats pulled low, and the way they moved spoke of men who knew these mountains and knew violence. Bandits. The mountains were full of them, preying on travelers who thought they could make the journey with minimal protection. Her wagon train had only 3 men capable of fighting, and from what she was seeing, they had already lost that fight. Willa waited until the riders passed, then waited longer until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely into the storm. She was trapped. Going down to the trail would mean risking an encounter with the bandits. Staying where she was would mean freezing to death. Going higher up the mountain was madness, but it was the only option that did not guarantee immediate disaster. She began to climb again, each step more difficult than the last. The slope grew steeper, the trees thicker, and the snow deeper. Her injured leg buckled twice, sending her to her knees in the snow, and each time it took longer to convince herself to stand again. The cold was seeping into her bones now, that deep, penetrating cold that made thinking difficult and movement feel like wading through molasses. Time became strange and elastic. She might have been climbing for minutes or hours. The world narrowed to the next handhold, the next step, the next tree to pull herself toward. She no longer felt the pain in her leg or the cold in her fingers. A distant part of her mind recognized this as dangerous, but that part was growing quieter with each passing moment. When she finally stopped, it was not because she chose to, but because her body simply would not move anymore. She had reached a small depression in the mountainside, partially sheltered by an overhanging rock and several fallen trees. It was not much, but it was all she could manage. She crawled into the space between the rock and the largest fallen log, pulling what dried needles and debris she could around herself in a futile attempt at insulation. The shaking had stopped. That was bad, she knew, though she could not quite remember why. Her thoughts were coming slower now, disconnected and dreamy. She thought about her father's ranch, about the wide open spaces of the Texas panhandle that she had taken for granted. She thought about the plans she had made for Denver, the dreams of independence and a life built on her own terms. Those dreams seemed very far away now, as insubstantial as the snow that continued to fall around her. She closed her eyes, and the darkness was almost welcoming. Vincent Nash had been tracking the Cartwright gang for 2 weeks, ever since they had robbed a payroll shipment outside of Trinidad and killed 2 guards in the process. As a deputy United States Marshal working out of Denver, hunting down men like Jack Cartwright and his brothers was his job, but this particular chase had been personal from the moment he saw the bodies they left behind. One of the guards had been 19 years old, barely more than a boy, shot in the back while trying to run for help. The storm had complicated everything. He had been closing in on the gang when the snow started falling, and now their tracks were being erased as quickly as they were made. He pushed his horse harder than he should have, knowing the animal was tired but knowing also that he could not afford to lose this trail. The Cartwrights were like ghosts in these mountains, appearing long enough to commit murder and robbery before vanishing into the wilderness they knew intimately. When he heard the gunshots echoing through the canyon, Vincent spurred his horse toward the sound, his hand already on his revolver. He arrived at the scene to find a wagon train scattered across the trail, horses gone, supplies ransacked, and 3 bodies lying in the snow. The survivors, mostly women and children and 2 older men, huddled together near one of the wagons, terrified and freezing. It took Vincent 20 minutes to get the story from them, hampered by their shock and the storm that was rapidly becoming a full blizzard. The Cartwrights had ambushed them, taken their horses and anything of value, and killed anyone who resisted. One of the older men thought there had been someone who escaped up the mountain, a young woman whose horse had bolted before the shooting started, but in the chaos, no one was certain. Vincent made a quick decision. He could not pursue the Cartwrights in this storm, and these people would die if left without help. The nearest way station was 3 miles back down the trail, a difficult journey but possible if they moved quickly. He organized them efficiently, putting the strongest on foot carrying the children, fashioning a travois to drag the injured, and leading them back the way he had come. By the time he got them to the way station and turned his horse back toward the mountains, 4 hours had passed and the storm had grown worse. Any sensible man would have waited it out, but Vincent could not shake the image of someone alone on the mountain in this weather. He had grown up in these mountains, had learned to track and hunt and survive in conditions that killed unprepared city folk within hours. If there was someone up there, they were likely already dead. But if there was even a chance they were alive, he had to try. He returned to the site of the ambush and began searching for tracks leading away from the trail. The snow had covered most of them, but there, near a cluster of rocks on the upward slope, he found disturbed ground that suggested someone had recently climbed through. The tracks were filling in fast, but Vincent had eyes trained by years in the wilderness, and he knew how to read sign that others would miss. He left his horse tied to a tree. The slope was too steep, and the conditions too dangerous for the animal. He would have to go on foot, and he would have to move fast. He gathered a pack with blankets, a canteen, matches wrapped in oilcloth, and strips of dried beef, then began to climb. The wind fought him with every step, trying to push him back down the mountain. Snow stung his face and blurred his vision. The temperature was dropping rapidly as afternoon faded toward evening, and Vincent knew that nightfall in these conditions meant death for anyone caught in the open. He found the first real sign about 100 yards up the slope, where a broken branch still showed the white wood beneath the bark. Someone had grabbed it recently, using it to pull themselves upward. 50 yards further, he found a scrap of dark fabric caught on a branch at shoulder height. He was on the right track. The tracks became easier to follow as he climbed higher, not because they were clearer, but because whoever he was following had begun to stagger. The marks in the snow showed dragging feet, handprints where they had fallen, and the zigzagging path of someone losing their ability to navigate. Vincent increased his pace, pushing himself harder, his heart hammering not from exertion, but from the growing certainty that he was running out of time. He almost missed her. The depression she had crawled into was sheltered enough that less snow had accumulated there, and the failing light made everything blend together into shades of gray and white. It was only because he paused to catch his breath and scan the area carefully that he spotted what looked like a hand extending from beneath a fallen log. Vincent covered the distance in seconds, dropping to his knees beside the figure and brushing away snow with hands that remained steady despite the urgency he felt. It was a woman, young, her face pale as the snow around her and her lips blue with cold. She was not moving, and for one terrible moment Vincent thought he was too late. Then he saw her chest rise with a shallow breath, and relief flooded through him so intensely it made his own hands shake. "I am not leaving without you," he said, though she could not hear him. It was a promise to himself as much as to her, a declaration against the mountain and the storm and the death that waited in the cold. He had not come this far, climbed this high, to fail now. He moved quickly, his training taking over. First, he checked her for injuries, running his hands carefully over her limbs and finding the swelling on her right leg that indicated a bad bruise or possibly a fracture. Her fingers were frighteningly cold, and her whole body had the limpness of someone in the late stages of hypothermia. She needed warmth immediately, but building a fire here was impossible. The wind was too strong, the wood too wet, and they did not have time. Vincent pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, then bundled her in both blankets from his pack. She made a small sound, something between a whimper and a sigh, but did not wake. He got his arms under her, lifting her as carefully as he could, and began the treacherous journey back down the mountain. Carrying another person down a steep snow-covered slope in a blizzard was one of the most difficult things Vincent had ever done, and his work had not been known for being easy. Every step had to be carefully placed, every shift in weight deliberately controlled. The woman was small, probably not more than 110 pounds, but in the conditions that weight felt immense. His muscles burned, his lungs ached from the cold air, and sweat froze on his face despite the temperature. He fell once, about halfway down, his foot sliding on ice hidden beneath the snow. He twisted as he went down, protecting her body with his own, and his back slammed into a tree trunk hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. For a long moment he just sat there in the snow, arms still locked around the unconscious woman, trying to remember how to breathe. Then he got up and kept moving. By the time he reached his horse, full darkness had fallen and the storm showed no sign of letting up. Vincent knew he could not make it back to the way station, not in these conditions carrying an injured woman. But there was another option, one he had been reluctant to consider, because it meant revealing something he generally kept private. About a mile west, hidden in a box canyon that was nearly impossible to find unless you knew exactly where to look, Vincent had built a small cabin. It was his refuge, the place he came between assignments when the work of hunting criminals became too heavy, and he needed solitude to remember who he was beneath the badge. He had never brought anyone there before. But it was close, and it was shelter, and right now those were the only things that mattered. He secured the woman on his horse, holding her in front of him so he could share what body heat he had left while keeping her as protected as possible from the wind. The horse was exhausted, but responded gamely to Vincent's commands, plodding through the deep snow with the steady determination of an animal that trusted its rider completely. The entrance to the box canyon was marked by two standing stones that looked like natural formations, but had been deliberately placed generations ago by the Ute people who had once made these mountains their home. Vincent guided his horse between them and into the canyon, where the high walls provided immediate relief from the worst of the wind. The cabin sat at the far end, built of solid logs and chinked tight against the weather, with a small stable beside it that had never looked more welcoming. Vincent got the horse into the stable first, removing its tack and rubbing it down quickly before throwing a blanket over it and leaving it with hay and water. Then he carried the woman into the cabin, kicking the door shut behind him and finally, getting them both out of the killing cold. The cabin was not large, just one room with a stone fireplace, a bed built into one corner, a table and two chairs, and shelves holding supplies. But it was tight and dry, and within minutes, Vincent had a fire roaring in the fireplace, filling the space with light and the promise of warmth. Only then did he let himself really look at the woman he had rescued. He laid her on the bed and began carefully removing her wet outer clothes, replacing them with dry blankets. Her hair was dark, almost black, and hung in wet tangles to her shoulders. Her face was fine-boned, and would have been pretty under better circumstances, but right now it was still far too pale and her breathing remained shallow. Vincent had seen hypothermia before and knew what needed to be done. He filled a pot with snow and set it by the fire to melt, then knelt beside the bed and began the slow process of warming her extremities. Her hands first, holding them gently between his own, rubbing carefully to encourage circulation without causing damage. Her fingers were like ice, and he could see the white patches that indicated frostbite on two of them. As he worked, he talked to her, his voice low and steady. "Come on now, you need to wake up. You have fought too hard to give up now. The worst is over. You are safe, you are warm, and you are going to be fine, but I need you to help me. I need you to wake up and start fighting again." It took almost an hour before she showed the first real signs of coming around. Her fingers twitched in his hands and a small sound escaped her lips. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. Vincent felt hope surge in his chest and kept working, kept talking, kept willing her back to consciousness. When her eyes finally opened, they were confused and unfocused, the deep brown of rich earth. She stared at him without comprehension, her brow furrowing slightly. "Easy," Vincent said softly. "You are safe. My name is Vincent Nash. I am a United States Marshal, and I found you on the mountain. You are in a cabin now out of the storm. Can you tell me your name?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She tried again, and this time managed a whisper so faint he had to lean close to hear it. "Willa," she breathed. "Willa Carson." "Well, Willa Carson, you are one of the toughest people I have ever met," Vincent said, allowing himself a small smile. "Not many people could survive what you just went through. How are you feeling? Can you tell me if anything hurts?" She closed her eyes for a moment as if taking inventory of her body. When she opened them again, they were slightly more focused. "Everything," she whispered. "My leg, my shoulder." "Cold, so cold, I know. But you are warming up now. Can you drink something for me? Just a little water." He helped her sit up enough to take small sips from a cup of the warmed water, supporting her head with one hand. She managed 3 swallows before turning her head away, exhausted from even that small effort. "The wagon train," she said suddenly, her eyes widening with memory and fear. "There were men, bandits. They shot." She tried to sit up further and gasped with pain, her hand going to her injured leg. "Easy, easy," Vincent said, gently pressing her back down. "I know. I found the wagon train. Most of the people are safe. I got them to a way station down the mountain. The bandits are gone." "Most." Willa's eyes filled with tears. "The Hendersons. They took their horses." "And Mr. Garrett, he tried to fight them. I am sorry," Vincent said quietly. "Some people did not make it. But you did. And right now I need you to focus on staying warm and resting. We can talk about everything else later." But Willa was shaking her head and the tears were spilling down her cheeks now. "I should have done something. I should have helped. I just hid and climbed and left them all. You survived," Vincent interrupted firmly. "If you had gone down there, you would be dead too, and I would have found one more body in the snow. What you did was smart and brave, and you are alive because of it. Do not dishonor that by second-guessing yourself." His words seemed to reach her, and some of the anguish in her eyes faded into exhaustion. She closed her eyes again, and within moments her breathing had evened out into sleep. Vincent sat beside the bed for a long time, watching her to make sure the sleep was natural and not a slide back into hypothermia. But her color was better now, the blue fading from her lips, and her breathing was deeper and more regular. Only when he was satisfied she was out of immediate danger did Vincent allow himself to tend to his own needs. He was soaked through with sweat and melted snow, and his muscles ached from the climb and the carrying. He changed into dry clothes, heated more water for coffee, and forced himself to eat some of the dried meat and hardtack he kept stored in the cabin. The storm continued to rage outside, the wind howling around the cabin walls, but inside it was warm and safe. Vincent sat at the table, drinking his coffee and staring into the fire, his mind working through the implications of what had happened. The Cartwrights were getting bolder, attacking larger groups in daylight. That spoke of confidence or desperation or both. They were also ranging further than they had before, expanding their territory. The ambush site had been at least 15 miles from where Vincent had expected to find them, which meant they were moving unpredictably or had a hideout in this area he did not know about. He would need to take Willa somewhere safe as soon as the storm cleared, probably back to the way station or down to one of the larger towns. Then he could resume his hunt for the gang, but that was a problem for later. Right now, his job was to make sure the woman sleeping in his bed survived the night. He checked on her every hour through the night, adding wood to the fire to keep the cabin warm, changing the cold compress on her injured leg, and making sure she was still breathing steadily. Around what he judged to be 3 in the morning, she woke again, this time more alert than before. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice still rough but stronger than earlier. Vincent rose from the chair by the fire and came to the bedside. "A cabin in the mountains, my cabin. The storm is still going strong outside, so we are stuck here for now." "How are you feeling?" "Warmer," Willa said. She tried to sit up and this time managed it with only a small grimace of pain. She looked around the cabin, taking in the simple furnishings and the supplies on the shelves, then looked back at Vincent. "You saved my life." "I did my job," Vincent said, but Willa shook her head. "Your job was to catch the bandits, I am guessing. You are a lawman, you said, a marshal. You could have gone after them. You chose to come looking for me instead." "Going after them in that storm would have been suicide," Vincent said practically. "And leaving you on the mountain would have been murder. It was not really a choice." "It was for me," Willa said softly. "Thank you." The gratitude in her eyes made something uncomfortable shift in Vincent's chest, and he looked away. "Are you hungry? I have some supplies. Nothing fancy, but better than nothing." Willa nodded, and Vincent set about preparing a simple meal of beans and bacon, heated in a pan over the fire. While he worked, Willa asked questions about the wagon train, about who had survived and who had not, and Vincent answered as honestly as he could. Each death seemed to hit her like a physical blow, and by the time he handed her a plate of food, her eyes were red from crying. "I did not know them well," she said, staring down at the food without eating. "The Hendersons, the Garretts, we had only been traveling together for 3 weeks, but they were good people. They did not deserve what happened to them." "No, they did not," Vincent agreed. He sat in the chair beside the bed, holding his own plate. "The men who did this, the Cartwright gang, they do not deserve to keep breathing. And I am going to make sure they do not, once I can get back on their trail." Willa looked at him then, really looked at him, studying his face in the firelight. "You have been chasing them for a while, have you not? This is not just another job to you." Vincent was surprised by her perception. Most people saw the badge and assumed they knew everything about him. But there was something in Willa's eyes, an intelligence and understanding that suggested she saw more than surface details. "They killed a kid in their last robbery," he said quietly. 19 years old, working his first real job as a guard, shot him in the back while he was running for help. His mother lives in Denver. I had to be the one to tell her what happened to her son." Willa was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Then I hope you catch them, and I hope they face justice for what they have done." They ate in silence after that, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who have shared something significant. When they finished, Vincent took the plates and cleaned them, then brought Willa more water and checked her injured leg again. "It is badly bruised, but I do not think anything is broken," he said. "You are going to have trouble walking on it for a while, but it should heal fine with rest. Your shoulder is the same. You are going to be sore for weeks, but nothing permanent." "I am luckier than I have any right to be," Willa said. "If you had not found me, but I did," Vincent interrupted. "So there is no point thinking about the alternative." Willa smiled slightly at that. "You are very practical, Marshal Nash." "Vincent, if we are going to be stuck in a cabin together for however long this storm lasts, you might as well call me Vincent." "Then you should call me Willa," she said. She paused, then added with a touch of her smile growing, "though I suppose you already are." The storm lasted 3 days. For 3 days, Vincent and Willa were trapped in the small cabin. The world beyond the door nothing but white fury and howling wind. And in those 3 days, something neither of them expected began to grow between them. At first, their conversations were practical, focused on immediate needs and survival. Vincent taught Willa how to properly dress her leg to reduce swelling, and she insisted on helping with chores despite her injuries, mending a torn shirt of his with a sewing kit she found in his supplies and doing what washing she could manage while seated. But as the hours passed and they grew more comfortable with each other, their talks deepened. Willa told him about growing up on her father's ranch near Tascosa, about learning to ride before she could properly walk and spending long days under the endless Texas sky. She spoke about her father with obvious love, describing him as a man who had treated her more like a son than a daughter, teaching her to rope and brand and manage cattle, because he believed she was just as capable as any man. "He never remarried after my mother died," she said one evening, staring into the fire. "I think he poured all the love he would have given her into raising me. When he died last year, it felt like the sun went out." Everything that came after, losing the ranch, having to leave Texas, it all seemed gray and flat. I kept thinking I should feel more, should be more upset about leaving, but all I could feel was numb. "Grief is not simple," Vincent said. "It comes and goes like waves. Sometimes you think you are fine, and then something small will hit you and you realize you have not even begun to deal with it." He spoke from experience, she realized. "You have lost people too." "My parents when I was 17, Vincent said. "There was a fire. They were trapped inside our house, and by the time I broke through the door to reach them, it was too late. I got them out, but they were already gone." Willa reached across the small space between the bed and the chair and took his hand. "I am so sorry." Vincent looked down at their joined hands, surprised by the gesture but not pulling away. "It was a long time ago. I have made my peace with it, mostly. But it is why I became a lawman. I wanted to be someone who could help people, who could stop bad things from happening before they cost lives. I do not always succeed, but I try." "That is all anyone can do," Willa said softly. Their hands remained clasped for a long moment before Vincent gently pulled away, standing to check the fire. But Willa could still feel the warmth where his hand had been, and something in her chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with her injuries. On the second day, Willa grew restless despite her pain and insisted on moving around the cabin. Vincent supported her as she practiced walking, his arm steady around her waist, and they made slow circuits around the small space. She was acutely aware of his closeness, of the strength in his arm and the way he smelled like wood smoke and leather, and something that was purely him. "Tell me about being a marshal," she said, partly to distract herself from the pain in her leg and partly because she genuinely wanted to know. "Is it like the stories? All gunfights and chasing outlaws?" Vincent laughed, a sound that transformed his usually serious face into something younger and more carefree. "Sometimes. But mostly it is a lot of riding through rain and sleeping on hard ground and eating food that barely qualifies as edible. The exciting parts are rare, and when they happen, they are usually terrifying rather than thrilling." "But you love it," Willa said. It was not a question. Vincent considered this. "I do. It is hard and often thankless, but it matters. Every criminal I bring in is one less person hurting innocent folks. Every family I can help is one less tragedy. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Willa said firmly. "People like you are the reason people like me can dream of building new lives in new places. You make civilization possible out here." Vincent looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "What were you planning to do in Denver? What kind of new life were you building?" Willa felt suddenly self-conscious. "It probably sounds foolish." "I was going to try to find work, maybe as a seamstress or in a boarding house. Save money. Eventually, I wanted to buy a small piece of land and raise horses. Good horses, the kind my father always talked about breeding but never had the capital to start. I am good with horses. I thought maybe I could build something real, something that was mine." "That does not sound foolish at all," Vincent said. "It sounds like a good plan, practical and achievable with enough hard work." "You think so?" Willa asked, and hated how uncertain her voice sounded. "I do," Vincent said firmly. "And for what it is worth, I think you will do it. Anyone who can survive what you survived has the grit to do just about anything they set their mind to." The conviction in his voice made Willa's throat tight with emotion. She had not realized how much she needed to hear someone say they believed in her until Vincent did. On the third day, they woke to silence. The howling wind had stopped, and when Vincent opened the door, he found the storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed into pristine white. The sun was rising over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink, and the air was so clear and cold it hurt to breathe. "It is beautiful," Willa breathed, standing beside him in the doorway wrapped in one of his blankets. "It is," Vincent agreed, but he was not looking at the landscape. He was looking at her, at the way the morning light caught in her dark hair and made her skin glow, at the wonder in her eyes as she took in the scene before them. He had not planned on this on her. In 3 days, she had become more than just a woman he had rescued. She had become someone he talked to easily, someone he looked forward to seeing each morning, someone whose smile made something warm unfurl in his chest. This was dangerous territory, and Vincent knew it. He was a marshal, constantly on the move, constantly in danger. He had never let himself get close to anyone because he knew what that kind of loss could do to a person. But standing there beside Willa in the doorway of his cabin, watching her face light up with joy at the simple beauty of a sunrise after a storm, Vincent felt his carefully maintained walls beginning to crumble. "We should be able to travel today," he said, forcing his mind back to practical matters. "I will need to get you to safety, probably to the way station where I left the others from your wagon train. From there you can get transport to Denver or back to Texas, whichever you prefer." Willa's smile faded slightly. "Of course, you have work to do, criminals to catch. I have already kept you from that longer than you planned." "That is not what I meant," Vincent said quickly. "Willa, the mountains are still dangerous. The bandits are still out there and you are injured. I need to make sure you are somewhere safe before I can do my job properly." "I understand," Willa said, but something in her voice suggested she was disappointed. "When will we leave?" "After breakfast. I need to check the pass and make sure the trail is clear. Give me a few hours to prepare." Those few hours passed too quickly. Vincent saddled his horse and secured supplies for the journey while Willa made herself as ready as possible. She was moving better now, though still with a pronounced limp, and she had borrowed one of Vincent's smaller shirts since her own clothes were still damaged from her ordeal. The ride down the mountain was slow and careful. Vincent kept his horse to a walk, acutely aware of Willa seated in front of him, of her back pressed against his chest and the way she felt in his arms. They did not talk much, both lost in their own thoughts, and the silence between them had changed. It was no longer comfortable. It was heavy with things unsaid. The way station appeared around a bend in the trail just after midday. It was a rough log building with a barn and corral, maintained by an older couple who had been serving travelers in these mountains for 20 years. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Vincent could see several horses in the corral, suggesting the survivors from the wagon train were still there. As they rode into the yard, people emerged from the building. Vincent recognized Mrs. Henderson, the young widow who had lost her husband in the attack, and several of the other survivors. They called out when they saw Willa, rushing forward with exclamations of relief and joy. "We thought you were dead, Mrs. Henderson said, tears streaming down her face as Vincent helped Willa down from the horse. "When Marshal Nash went back out into that storm to look for you, I thought we would never see either of you again." "He saved my life," Willa said simply, looking back at Vincent with an expression that made his heart clench. "I would have frozen to death on that mountain if not for him. The next hour was a confusion of explanations and reunions, as Willa was brought inside, examined by the station keeper's wife, who had some medical knowledge, and reunited with her fellow travelers. Vincent stood apart from it all, speaking quietly with the station keeper about the conditions of the trail and the best route for the survivors to continue their journey once they were ready. It was late afternoon when Willa found him in the barn, checking on his horse. She moved quietly, her injured leg making her steps uneven, and he did not hear her approach until she spoke. "You are leaving." Vincent turned to face her. "I have to. The Cartwrights have too much of a head start already. Every day I wait is another day they have to hurt more people." "I know," Willa said. She was holding something in her hands, a piece of paper folded carefully. "I know you have to go, but I wanted to give you this before you left. It is an address in Denver, a friend of my father who owns a boarding house. I will be staying there once I get to the city. In case." She trailed off, not finishing the sentence. Vincent took the paper, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "In case what?" Willa met his eyes, and in hers he saw everything he was feeling reflected back at him. The longing, the fear, the impossibility of what was growing between them. "In case you survive," she said quietly. "In case you finish your job and decide you might want to find me. I know it is foolish. I know we barely know each other, and you are a marshal, and I am just a woman with no money and uncertain prospects. But these past 3 days meant something to me, Vincent. You mean something to me, and I think maybe I mean something to you too." She was right. She did mean something to him, more than was wise or safe or practical. But Vincent had spent his whole adult life being wise and safe and practical. And where had it gotten him? Alone in a cabin between assignments, with nothing to show for his years of service, but scars and the satisfaction of a job well done. "You do," he said, the admission feeling like stepping off a cliff. "You mean a great deal to me, Willa, more than I expected, more than I probably should let you mean." "Then find me," Willa said, stepping closer until only inches separated them. "When this is done, when you have caught your criminals and done your duty, come find me in Denver. Let us see if what we feel now, what started in that cabin during the storm, is real. Let us see if it can survive in the ordinary world." Vincent wanted to argue, to list all the reasons why this was a bad idea, why he should walk away now before either of them got hurt. But looking into Willa's eyes, seeing the hope and determination and affection there, he found he could not do it. "I will find you," he said. "I promise. It might take weeks or even months, but when this is finished, I will come to Denver and I will find you." Willa smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then I will wait." She stood on her toes and kissed him, her lips soft and warm against his, and Vincent pulled her close, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. It was a promise, that kiss, a seal on the vow he had just made. When they finally pulled apart, Vincent rested his forehead against hers, memorizing this moment, this feeling. "Be safe," Willa whispered. "Come back to me." "I will," Vincent promised. "Wait for me. I will." Leaving was one of the hardest things Vincent had ever done, but he forced himself to mount his horse and ride away from the way station without looking back. He had work to do, a job to finish, and he could not afford the distraction of thinking about Willa and what might be waiting for him in Denver. But as he rode back into the mountains, the paper with her address tucked carefully in his pocket, Vincent allowed himself to hope for the first time in years that he might have something to come home to when this was done. The hunt for the Cartwright gang took longer than Vincent expected. The trail went cold several times, forcing him to rely on rumors and speculation to track their movements. They hit a mining camp near Leadville in February, killing 2 guards and making off with 6 months' worth of gold dust. They robbed a stage outside of Fairplay in March, leaving the driver and 3 passengers dead on the side of the road. Each new crime scene filled Vincent with cold fury and strengthened his resolve. The Cartwrights were getting bolder, more reckless, and that meant they would make a mistake. He just had to be patient enough to catch it. The break came in early April. Vincent had been working with local law enforcement in the mining towns, building a network of informants and contacts who could provide information on the gang's movements. One of these informants, a saloon owner in Alma, sent word that 3 men matching the Cartwrights' descriptions had been asking about the payroll schedule for the Moose Mine, one of the largest operations in the area. Vincent organized a trap. With the help of the mine owner and 6 deputized miners who could handle themselves in a fight, he set up an ambush at the narrow pass the gang would have to use to escape after the robbery. They let the Cartwrights hit the payroll wagon, let them think they had succeeded, and then closed in from both sides of the pass. The resulting gunfight was brief and brutal. Jack Cartwright died with his gun in his hand, refusing to surrender even when it was clear he was beaten. His younger brother Tom was wounded in the shoulder and captured alive. The third brother, William, tried to flee on horseback and was shot from the saddle by one of the miners, dying before he hit the ground. It was over. 3 months of hunting, 3 months of following cold trails and dead ends, and it was finally over. Vincent felt only tired satisfaction as he stood over Jack Cartwright's body, looking down at the man who had caused so much death and destruction. There was no triumph, no sense of victory. Just the quiet knowledge that the job was done, and no one else would die at this man's hands. Tom Cartwright was transported to Denver to stand trial for his crimes. Vincent accompanied him, keeping careful watch on the prisoner during the week-long journey. Tom was sullen and angry at first, cursing Vincent and swearing vengeance. But as the days passed and the reality of his situation sank in, he grew quiet and withdrawn. Was it worth it? Vincent asked him one evening as they camped beside the trail. All the people you killed, all the lives you destroyed, was whatever you stole worth that? Tom stared into the fire for a long time before answering. It was supposed to be different. We were supposed to be smart about it, careful. Just take enough to get by and then disappear, start over somewhere else. But Jack, he always wanted more. Always pushed for bigger scores, riskier jobs. And Will and me, we just followed along because he was our brother and that is what you do. You still made the choice, Vincent said. Every time you pulled that trigger, every time you took a life, that was a choice you made. I know, Tom said quietly. And I am going to hang for it, I reckon. I am not asking for mercy. I am just saying it was not supposed to end like this. Vincent did not respond. There was nothing to say. Tom was right about one thing: he was going to hang. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and the territorial court had little patience for murderers. They reached Denver on a warm afternoon in late April. The city had grown since Vincent was last there. New buildings rising up along the streets and more people crowding the boardwalks. Spring was taking hold in the high country, melting the snow and turning the world green again. Vincent turned Tom over to the city marshal and spent the next 2 days giving testimony and filing reports. The administrative side of law enforcement had always been his least favorite part of the job, but it was necessary. Justice required paperwork as much as it required bullets. On the 3rd day, Vincent retrieved the carefully folded paper from his pocket and looked at the address Willa had given him. His heart was hammering in a way that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with hope and fear, tangled together into something he could not quite name. He had thought about Willa constantly during the hunt, wondering if she was safe, if she had made it to Denver, if she had found work and started building the life she wanted. He had thought about the 3 days they spent in the cabin, about the conversations and the silences and the way she had looked at him in the morning light. He had thought about her promise to wait and his promise to find her. And now he was here, and he could keep that promise, and he was terrified she might have changed her mind. The boarding house was in a respectable part of town, a 3-story building with fresh paint and lace curtains in the windows. Vincent stood outside for a full minute, gathering his courage before finally climbing the steps and knocking on the door. An older woman answered, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and her expression friendly. "Can I help you?" "I am looking for Willa Carson," Vincent said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I was told she might be staying here." The woman's expression shifted to something knowing and amused. "You must be Marshal Nash. She said you might come. Please come in, I will fetch her." Vincent followed her into a neat parlor and waited, his hat in his hands, feeling more nervous than he had facing down 3 armed criminals. He heard footsteps on the stairs, quick and light, and then Willa was there in the doorway, and the sight of her drove the air from his lungs. She was wearing a simple dress of pale blue, her dark hair pulled back and her face glowing with health and happiness. Her eyes went wide when she saw him, and for a moment they just stared at each other across the parlor. "You came," Willa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I promised I would," Vincent said. "I am sorry it took so long, the hunt was complicated. But you caught them." "I did. It is finished." Willa crossed the room in 3 quick steps and threw her arms around him, and Vincent caught her and held her tight, his face buried in her hair, breathing in the scent of her and feeling the tension he had been carrying for months finally ease. "I was afraid you might not come," Willa said against his chest. "I was afraid you might have decided it was a mistake, that I was a mistake." "Never," Vincent said fiercely. "You were never a mistake, Willa. You were the best thing that came out of that whole terrible situation. I thought about you every day. Every day I was tracking those men, I thought about getting back to you." Willa pulled back enough to look up at him, and her eyes were shining with tears. "I got a job at a dress shop on Larimer Street. The pay is decent and the owner is kind. And I have been saving every penny I can. I have almost enough to start looking at land for the horse breeding program I told you about." "That is wonderful," Vincent said, meaning it. "I am so proud of you." "I did it for me," Willa said, "but I also did it for us. I wanted to prove that I could build something real, something lasting. I wanted to be someone worthy of a marshal who climbs mountains in blizzards to save people." "You were already worthy," Vincent said, "but I understand wanting to prove it to yourself. I have been doing the same thing my whole career." They stood there in the parlor, holding each other, and Vincent felt something settle in his chest. This was right. She was right. Whatever happened next, wherever life took them, they would face it together. Over the following weeks, Vincent and Willa settled into a courtship that was both exhilarating and comfortable. Vincent was based in Denver between assignments, which meant he could see Willa regularly. They took walks through the growing city, attended church services together, and had dinner at the boarding house several times a week under the watchful but approving eye of Mrs. Patterson, the owner. Vincent learned that Willa was even more remarkable than he had realized during their time in the cabin. She had a quick mind for business and had already begun making connections in Denver's horse breeding community, attending auctions and sales and learning everything she could about bloodlines and training methods. She spoke passionately about her plans, her eyes lighting up as she described the kind of ranch she wanted to build. "I want to breed horses for working ranches," she said one evening as they walked along Cherry Creek. "Not fancy show horses or racing stock, but solid, reliable horses that can handle the harsh conditions out here. Horses like the one my father had, the ones that will work all day without complaint and still have heart left for an emergency. That is a good goal, Vincent said. Practical and needed. There is always demand for good working horses. I have been talking to a rancher who has some land about 30 miles outside the city, Willa continued. He is getting older and wants to sell a section of it. It has good grass, access to water, and some existing structures. I might be able to afford it by next year if I keep saving. Vincent felt something twist in his chest. The idea of Willa out on a ranch 30 miles from Denver, isolated and alone, made him deeply uneasy. But he also knew he had no right to ask her to change her plans, not when they had only been courting for a few weeks. As if reading his mind, Willa stopped walking and turned to face him. "Vincent, I need to know something. Where do you see this going? Us, I mean. Because I am making plans for my future, and I need to know if you are going to be part of that future, or if this is just something temporary for you." Vincent looked down at her, at the directness in her eyes and the vulnerability beneath it, and knew he could not hedge or deflect. Willa deserved honesty. "I want to be part of your future," he said carefully, "but I need you to understand what that means. Being with a Marshal is not easy, Willa. I am gone for weeks or months at a time. The work is dangerous. There is a real possibility that one day I might not come back." "I know that," Willa said. "I have thought about it a great deal. But Vincent, life is dangerous for everyone out here. People die from disease, from accidents, from 1,000 different causes. At least with you, I know you are fighting for something that matters. And when you do come back, I know you will be someone I respect and admire. It would not be fair to you," Vincent said, "to ask you to wait, to spend your life worrying whether I am alive or dead." "That is my choice to make, not yours," Willa said firmly. "I am a grown woman, and I can decide what I am willing to accept in a relationship. And I am telling you right now that I would rather have a life with you, even with all the uncertainty and difficulty that entails, than a safe, comfortable life with someone I do not love." Vincent felt his heart stop at that word. Love. She had said love. "Willa," he started, but she cut him off. "I love you," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it is too soon and we have only known each other a few months, but I love you, Vincent Nash. I fell in love with you in that cabin when you kept talking to me to keep me conscious, when you held my hands to warm them, when you looked at me like I was someone worth saving. And every moment since has just made me more certain." Vincent pulled her close and kissed her there beside the creek, in full view of anyone who might be passing by, and he did not care who saw. When he pulled back, his voice was rough with emotion. "I love you too," he said. "I've been trying not to because I thought it would be easier, safer for both of us, but I cannot help it. You are in my head and my heart, and I do not want you anywhere else." Willa laughed, a sound of pure joy, and kissed him again. "Then we will figure out the rest together. Whatever challenges come, whatever difficulties we face, we will deal with them as they arise. But we will do it together." Vincent proposed properly 2 months later with a ring he had saved 3 months' salary to buy. Willa said yes before he even finished asking the question, and they were married in October of 1878 in a simple ceremony at the church in Denver. Mrs. Patterson and several of Willa's co-workers from the dress shop attended, as did 3 other Marshals Vincent worked with. It was small and quick and perfect. Their first year of marriage was an adjustment. Vincent was called away on assignments regularly, sometimes for weeks at a time. Each departure was difficult, each return a joy that made the separation worthwhile. Willa continued working at the dress shop and saving money, but she began to shift her plans. "I have been thinking," she said one night as they lay in bed in the small house they had rented on the edge of Denver. "Maybe instead of buying land immediately, I should wait a few years." build up more capital, make better connections, and that way I can travel with you sometimes when the assignments allow it." Vincent propped himself up on one elbow to look at her. "You would do that, change your plans for me." "Not for you," Willa corrected. "For us. My dream of breeding horses is not going anywhere, but my opportunity to build a life with you while we are both young, that is time-sensitive. We can have both, Vincent, but maybe not at the same time. And right now, being with you is more important." Vincent felt his throat grow tight with emotion. "You are extraordinary, do you know that?" Willa smiled and pulled him down for a kiss. "I am practical. There is a difference." In the spring of 1879, Vincent was offered a promotion to Chief Deputy Marshal, a position that would keep him based primarily in Denver with only occasional field assignments. It meant more paperwork and less action, and Vincent agonized over the decision for weeks. "Take it," Willa finally said, exasperated with his indecision. "Vincent, you are 32 years old. You have been doing this dangerous work for over a decade. You have earned the right to a position that does not require you to risk your life on a weekly basis. And selfishly, I want my husband home more often. Is that so wrong?" It was not wrong. And when Vincent looked at it objectively, he realized he was ready for the change. He had proven himself in the field. Now he could contribute by training younger deputies and coordinating operations across the territory. It was important work, and it would allow him to be the husband Willa deserved. He accepted the promotion. With Vincent's increased salary and more stable hours, combined with Willa's savings, they were able to purchase the land she had been eyeing. 32 acres with a small ranch house, a barn that needed work, and good grazing. Willa quit her job at the dress shop and threw herself into building the horse breeding operation she had dreamed about. Vincent helped when he could, learning about horses in a way he never had before. He could ride. Of course, any lawman in the West could ride, but Willa taught him to see the animals as individuals, to recognize quality in bone structure and temperament, to understand the importance of careful breeding. Their first successful foal was born in the spring of 1881, a strong colt with good legs and an intelligent eye. Willa named him Nash's Pride, and Vincent did not even try to hide how touched he was by the gesture. "He is the first of many," Willa said, standing beside Vincent at the corral fence and watching the colt run beside his mother. "The foundation of what we are building here." Vincent put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "We are building a good life, Willa." "Better than I ever thought I would have." "We are," Willa agreed. She paused, then added with studied casualness, "and it is going to get even better in about 6 months. It took Vincent a moment to understand what she was saying, and when he did, his heart seemed to stop and then start again double time. "You are pregnant?" "I am," Willa said, turning to look up at him with a smile that held both joy and nervousness. "I saw the doctor last week to confirm it. He says everything looks good. We are going to have a baby, Vincent." Vincent let out a whoop of joy and swept Willa up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. When he did, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her tenderly. "You have made me the happiest man in Colorado," he said. "In the whole world, a baby, our baby." Their son was born in December of 1881, right as the first major snow was falling. It was a difficult labor that left Vincent terrified and helpless, able to do nothing but hold Willa's hand and try to offer comfort. But when the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in his arms, Vincent felt something shift fundamentally in his world. "He is perfect," he breathed, looking down at the tiny red face and the impossibly small fingers that gripped his thumb with surprising strength. "He is," Willa agreed, exhausted but radiant. "What should we call him?" They had discussed names for months, unable to agree on anything. But now, holding his son and looking at his wife, Vincent knew exactly what the boy's name should be. James, he said. After your father, James Carson Nash. Willa's eyes filled with tears. My father would have loved that. He would have loved you, Vincent. Thank you. The years that followed were full and rich. The horse breeding operation grew steadily, with Willa developing a reputation for producing quality working horses. Vincent's career continued to advance, and in 1883 he was appointed Chief Marshal for the Colorado Territory, a position of significant responsibility and respect. They had a daughter in 1884, a tiny fierce thing they named Sarah, and another son in 1887 called Thomas. The ranch house expanded to accommodate their growing family, and the barn was rebuilt to be twice its original size. They hired 2 hands to help with the daily work, giving Willa time to focus on the breeding program and spend time with the children. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters that killed livestock, droughts that made water scarce, and the constant challenges of raising children in a harsh environment. Vincent still faced danger occasionally in his work, and there were nights when Willa lay awake worrying until she heard his horse in the yard. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other and from the life they had built. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch was peaceful, Vincent and Willa would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. And Vincent would remember a blizzard and a mountain and a woman who had been freezing to death when he found her. Do you ever think about that day? He asked one such evening in the summer of 1890. On the mountain when I found you, Willa leaned against his shoulder, her hand in his. Every day, she said. That was the day my real life began. Everything before was just prologue. I told you I was not leaving without you, Vincent said, smiling at the memory. And you kept your promise, Willa said. You have kept every promise you ever made to me, Vincent Nash. You saved my life that day, and you have made it worth living every day since. Vincent pulled her close and kissed the top of her head, his heart full in a way he had never imagined possible when he was a solitary marshal riding through the mountains alone. You saved me too, he said quietly. You gave me something to come home to, something to build toward. You made me understand what I was fighting for all those years. It was this. It was us. It was family and home and love. As they sat there in the gathering twilight, the sounds of their ranch settling for the night around them and their children sleeping safely inside the house they had built together, Vincent felt a profound sense of gratitude and peace. The Wild West was slowly being tamed, civilization spreading across the territories, and the world he had known as a young marshal was changing in fundamental ways. But this, what he had with Willa and their children, this would endure. Love endured, family endured. And the bond forged between 2 people in a cabin during a blizzard, when a lawman refused to leave without the woman he had climbed a mountain to save, that would last forever. Years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and growth. By 1895, James was 13 and already showing promise as a horseman, working alongside his mother in the breeding operation with a natural skill that made Willa glow with pride. Sarah at 11 was fierce and independent, more interested in her father's stories of law enforcement than in domestic pursuits, much to Vincent's secret delight. And Thomas at 8 was the dreamer of the family, always sketching the horses and landscapes around him, seeing beauty in everything. The Nash Ranch had become one of the most respected horse breeding operations in Colorado, with buyers coming from as far as Wyoming and New Mexico to purchase Willa's stock. She had achieved everything she had dreamed about that day on the mountain, and more. The horses she bred were known for their intelligence, endurance and steady temperament, perfect for the hard work of ranching in unforgiving country. Vincent had retired from active law enforcement in 1892, at the age of 45, deciding he had spent enough years facing danger and that he wanted to see his children grow up. He still consulted occasionally on difficult cases, his experience and knowledge valued by the younger generation of lawmen, but mostly he devoted himself to the ranch and his family. On a crisp October afternoon in 1896, Willa and Vincent stood together watching James work with a young mare in the training corral. The boy had his mother's gift with horses, patient and firm and understanding. The mare, skittish when they had acquired her, was responding beautifully to his handling. "He is better at this than I ever was," Willa said softly, a note of wonder in her voice. "He learned from the best," Vincent said, putting his arm around her waist. They had both grayed over the years, lines etching themselves around their eyes and mouths, but Vincent still thought Willa was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "Do you ever regret it?" Willa asked suddenly. "Giving up the Marshal service? I know you loved that work." Vincent was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "No," he said finally. "I had a good career and I am proud of what I accomplished. But this, here with you and our children, this is worth more than any badge or commendation. I made the right choice, Willa." "I have never doubted that." Willa turned in his arms to face him fully. "We have built something good here, have we not? Something lasting." "We have built something extraordinary," Vincent corrected. "Most people dream about having what we have. We are very fortunate." "Not fortunate," Willa said, reaching up to touch his weathered face. "We worked for this. We fought for it. We chose each other every single day, even when it was hard. That is not fortune, Vincent. That is love and commitment and partnership." Vincent caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "You are right, and I would choose you again in an instant. Every day, every moment, I would choose you." They stood there in the afternoon sunlight, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built a life together against all odds. Behind them, their children's laughter rang out from the house. Around them, the ranch they had created together stretched across the land. And above them, the Colorado sky spread wide and blue. The same sky that had been full of snow and storm the day Vincent climbed a mountain and said he was not leaving without the woman he found freezing there. As winter approached again in 1897, Vincent found himself reflecting more on the passage of time. James was nearly 16 now and talking about wanting to expand the breeding operation, possibly acquiring land adjacent to theirs. Sarah had surprised them all by announcing her intention to study law, inspired by her father's career. And Thomas was developing real talent as an artist, his sketches of horses so lifelike they seemed ready to step off the page. On Christmas Eve, with the family gathered around the fireplace in the expanded ranch house, Vincent stood to make a toast. His 3 children looked at him expectantly, and Willa smiled from her place beside him, knowing without being told what he was about to say. 18 years ago, Vincent began, I rode into a blizzard looking for someone I had never met, someone who might already have been dead. I found your mother on that mountain, barely alive, and I made her a promise. I told her I was not leaving without her. The children had heard this story before, but they listened raptly as they always did. It was their origin story, the beginning of the family that had become the center of their world. That was the best decision I ever made, Vincent continued, his voice growing thick with emotion. Climbing that mountain, refusing to give up the search, keeping that promise. Because everything good in my life came from that choice. Your mother, this ranch, all 3 of you. I am the luckiest man who ever lived. We are all lucky, Willa said, rising to stand beside him. We found each other when we both needed saving, and we saved each other every single day since. James raised his glass, followed by Sarah and Thomas. To family, James said, his young voice strong and sure. To family, they all echoed and drank. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Vincent and Willa stood on the porch as they had so many times before. Snow was beginning to fall, soft and gentle, nothing like the deadly blizzard that had nearly taken Willa's life all those years ago. "Do you think she knew?" Willa asked quietly, watching the snow drift down in the lamplight. "The girl I was then, freezing on that mountain. Do you think she could have imagined all of this?" Vincent considered the question. "I think she hoped for it. I think she had the strength and the vision to hope even when things were darkest. That is why she survived, Willa. Because she refused to give up, even when giving up would have been easier." "And you," Willa said, turning to look at him. "The Marshal who climbed that mountain in a blizzard, who said he was not leaving without me. Did he imagine this future?" "No," Vincent admitted. "I did not imagine it, but I wanted it, even before I knew what it was I was wanting. I was so alone before you, Willa. I did not even realize how alone I was until I had you to come home to." Willa took his hand, lacing their fingers together the way she had thousands of times over their years together. "We were both alone, and then we found each other. Against all odds, against all logic, we found each other and we chose each other, and we built this life together. That is our legacy, Vincent. Not just the ranch or the children or the things we have accomplished. Our legacy is proving that love can survive anything, even mountains and blizzards and impossible odds." Vincent pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the snow fell around them. They were older now, their bodies marked by time and hard work, but the essential truth between them had not changed. They loved each other with the same fierce devotion that had begun in a cabin during a storm, and that love had only deepened with each passing year. "I love you, Willa Carson Nash," Vincent said into her hair. "I have loved you since the moment you opened your eyes in my cabin and told me your name, and I will love you until the day I die." "And beyond," Willa said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I will love you beyond death, Vincent Nash. In whatever comes next, I will still be loving you." They stood there together as the snow fell, two people who had defied fate and built something beautiful from a moment of crisis and courage. Around them, the ranch slept peacefully, their children safe and warm inside the house. Above them, the stars emerged between the clouds, brilliant and eternal. The Wild West that had been their youth was passing into history. The 20th century was approaching, bringing changes neither of them could fully imagine. But whatever came next, whatever challenges the future held, they would face it as they had faced everything else since that day on the mountain, together, always together. Because Vincent Nash had climbed a mountain in a blizzard and said he was not leaving without Willa Carson. And he had kept that promise every single day since, in every possible way. He had not left her then, and he would not leave her now. They were bound together by more than vows or law or circumstance. They were bound by choice, by commitment, by love that had been tested and proven time and time again. As they finally went inside, shaking snow from their clothes and banking the fire for the night, Vincent took one last look at the ranch spread out in the moonlight. This was what he and Willa had built. This was their legacy. A place of love and work and family, carved out of wilderness and hardship through sheer determination and partnership. He climbed into bed beside Willa, pulling her close as he had every night of their marriage. She sighed contentedly and settled against him, her breathing soon evening out into sleep. Vincent lay awake a while longer, thinking about mountains and blizzards and impossible rescues, thinking about promises kept and lives built and love that endured. Outside, the snow continued to fall, gentle and peaceful. Inside, the Nash family slept secure in the life they had created together. And Vincent Nash, once a solitary marshal riding through the wilderness, now surrounded by the love and warmth of family, finally let himself drift into sleep with a smile on his face and gratitude in his heart. The story of the cowboy who climbed a mountain and refused to leave without the woman he found freezing there had become their family legend, told and retold to children and eventually grandchildren. But it was more than just a story. It was a testament to the power of courage and determination and love. It was proof that sometimes the most important rescues save not just a life but a future, not just a person but a family. And as the years continued to pass, and the Nash family continued to grow and thrive, that truth remained constant at the center of everything they were and everything they would become. Vincent and Willa had saved each other on a snowy mountain in 1878, and they continued to save each other every day after, building a love story that would endure through generations. A love story that began with a promise and a mountain and a cowboy who refused to leave without the woman who would become his whole world. Their story was complete, their ending happy, their legacy secure. And on quiet winter nights when the snow fell soft and gentle over the ranch they had built together, you could almost hear the echo of that long-ago promise carried on the wind. I am not leaving without you. And in every light burning in the windows, in every horse running free in the pastures, in every child and grandchild who carried their names forward, the answer came back clear and true. And I will always wait for you. Together they had created something beautiful and lasting from a moment of crisis. Together they had proven that true love does not just survive difficulty. It is forged by it, strengthened by it, made eternal by the choices two people make to stand together against whatever comes. Vincent and Willa Nash had built their happily ever after not through luck or fate but through courage and commitment, and the simple, powerful choice to love each other completely, every single day, for the rest of their lives. And that, in the end, was the truest love story of all.